Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik with Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it. Hey everyone, welcome to the FigureItOutcast. This is Adam Koralik, your host for March 2018. As always, I'm here to talk about various subjects, some of which are picked by Patreon backers, and this whole show really is done for Patreon backers. So if you are a Patreon backer, you got early access to it. But if not, if you're just watching this on the public version that comes out towards the end of the month, I appreciate you just listening. So thank you very much. If you like this or any of my content at any time, you can go to Patreon and get access to early access videos, including this, which comes out like a full month in advance. But anyway, I figure let's just go ahead and get started here. No special guests or anything on this particular episode. It's just me talking about various subjects I found interesting or amusing for one reason or another. So the first subject is, I'm going to just kind of call an oddball subject. It just was a story that caught my attention because I thought it was so insane. So I wanted to talk about it because it's just random as hell. There's a story recently that a guy named Ben Greenfield had his dick injected with stem cells hoping to make it bigger. And he claims that it actually worked. Now, that story is like, what? I mean, I know I've heard about stem cells, of course, are, usually come from aborted fetus tissue, although now they're able to get them from other sources. And so people have been experimenting with what you can do with stem cells. And there's basically the idea is that stem cells are like blank cells, and then they can be used to replicate other cells and, in theory, repair damaged sections. So it has been proven that you can repair sections, I guess, of your dick with stem cells. But this dude wanted to try and just make it bigger. Now there's no, as far as I know, viable proof that it actually got bigger. But if that's true, this guy just invented the big dick pill. Like, that was a joke for a long time, the concept of big dick pills. This guy might have actually made that happen, and that to me is hilarious. So I guess good luck to him with all that. I don't know. I personally would never try that. I'm okay with my particular member, but yeah, I don't know. That would not be too interested in pursuing something like that. But I'm curious, I guess, if people would be, or if they would. I don't know, man. I'm not a scientist, but to me, it doesn't seem like that would or should work. Like, it seems like the way that would work is it's designed to repair cells, I guess. But the idea that, like, by that logic, you could inject it in your arm and your arm would get bigger, in theory. Now, again, I'm not a scientist. It's very possible that there's like a real world explanation for why that would work. I'm simply unaware of it, but I don't know. I think that's kind of hilarious too. Like, just as a story, I just think it's fucking weird. That's the world we live in, where people are like, yeah, stem cells, like this miracle breakthrough technology and all that. I'm gonna make my dick bigger. It's like one of humanity's like core things. Like, that's what we care about. It's fucked up. But I don't know. I just thought that was funny. But anyway, let's move on to more like random pop culture type of things. So I'm sure a lot of you who watch or listen to me, watch my stuff, whatever, are familiar with Rick and Morty. Obviously a very popular animated show, very good show. And there was this incident last year, as I'm sure a lot of you know, when season 3 started. There's an episode, I think it's the actual first episode of season 3, where Rick mentions the concept of McDonald's Szechuan sauce. And it was a limited run thing done through the movie Mulan. It was like a promotional thing. And he was like, he had this goal to try and get the sauce. Well, fans went nuts with that and really tried to push McDonald's to make the sauce again. McDonald's didn't take them too seriously, and eventually they decided to do it in a very limited capacity, thinking this really wasn't that popular of a movement. And then they did it, and they released these very limited quantities of it. And like when that happened, I think it was like October of last year, of 2017. There were like riots and stuff where people trying to get it. There were stories of people who got it and would like sell their car to buy one. Stupid things like that. And there's tons of videos of just complete idiots like jumping around inside of McDonald's demanding Szechuan sauce. And it's just like, Jesus, whatever. But anyway, so the update there is, as I'm sure a lot of you know now, McDonald's has decided to release the Szechuan sauce as a wide thing. It's readily available now at least American McDonald's. I don't know about international locations, but at least in the States, you can now just walk into a McDonald's and get Szechuan sauce. Now, I personally haven't tried it. I was kind of tempted to, but at the same time, I really don't eat at McDonald's. And from what I've heard from a lot of people, it's really not that good, which is to be expected. This is one of the weirdest things about American pop culture, man, is that something like this could happen where just a random little factoid about some random Szechuan sauce from McDonald's somehow makes a resurgence 20 years later, and to the point of like insane popularity, even though it's really not anything special. That's, I don't know, we live in a fucking weird age, man, but hey, I'm happy for all the people out there who actually wanted to try this stuff. I mean, to be honest, I am a tad curious to try it, but not enough to actually go do it. I would have to already be there or something. But I'm curious, to those of you out there who have actually had access to it or got one, did you like it? Was it what you remembered? I think I had it when Mulan came out, and I don't remember it making any sort of impact on me at the time. But yeah, I'm just curious what people think, if anybody out there pursued this at all, because it's so strange to me. But yeah, moving on. Now, this is another little random story that I found interesting. So in Japan, there is some potato chip company that decided to release potato chips based on famous Japanese YouTubers. And I was just wondering, well, first of all, Japan gets all sorts of like insane snacks and like promotional stuff that we never see. But that concept of just like a potato chip based on American YouTubers or even worldwide YouTubers, why don't we have that? That sounds awesome. Like, I mean, I know I would never qualify as that, and I'm totally fine with that, but it'd be kind of cool to go around and find like just YouTube snack treats that just have all the images of all these like famous people. And I'm wondering, would anybody out there get that? And if such a thing existed, you know, do they split royalties? You know, I don't know. That seems like such a weird thing to me. And I'm just curious how the Japanese did that. If they, you know, went to all these YouTubers, or if there's some legal reason they don't have to do that. Are the chips any good? I don't know. I'm probably going to be in Japan, or I've already been to Japan by the time this is public again. So if I see them, maybe I'll grab them and I'll give some sort of update later. I don't know. We'll see. But it just sounds so bizarre. Again, it's one of those things, like, we're in such a weird era now where like individuals in pop culture are born into just this ability to like spread influence. I mean, it's the influencers era, so you know, because of that, you know, you got people who end up on potato chips, and you have a show that can bring back an old obscure version of sauce, you know, stuff like that. You also have a guy who can make his dick bigger with fucking, you know, stem cells. I don't know, it's just, we live in a crazy time, and I don't know, it's just fucking weird. It's all really weird. And so I know this podcast has already started off really, really strange because it was a bunch of random stories in a row. So let's just get something on target here. Let's actually go with something video game focused, because that's obviously what a lot of people care about when they're listening to me. So that particular subject would be the following. This is something that I predicted a while ago, but I was definitely off about the date. I'll give Sony credit for this. They lasted longer than I expected them to. Sony announced that on March 8th, 2019, they will no longer include PS3 and Vita titles in PlayStation Plus. Now, I said around the time that the PS4 came out, we're going to have the PS3 servers are going to shut down. Like, eventually you're not going to be able to play online. There's not going to be any new content, stuff like that. That's not what this announcement is, but it's definitely hinting at that reality. Now, I was off. I thought they'd do that by like 2017 or 2018. 2019, it seems like they'll still have the servers operational, but that's definitely the death nail. Like, there's not going to be much else to it at that point, because if they're no longer including even the free titles in that, then those servers are coming down. My guess is the Xbox servers stay up longer now because they're still using their backlog as part of the Xbox One backwards compatibility program. But yeah, so get prepared if you are into the Vita and into the PS3, that the connectivity of those things is on borrowed time at this point. You probably have at least a year, maybe a year and a half, possibly two, before those things are not operational anymore, is my guess. Admittedly, I was wrong before, but this is going to happen. Those servers will come down at some point. It's just a matter of when. And this is a good sign that they're getting ready for that. Now, on the subject of this particularly, so my understanding is, now personally I don't use PlayStation Plus. I never have, probably never will. I don't play online. I don't really need it. The way that always worked was that if you were a subscriber to it, you got a couple of digital copies of games for your Vita, your PS3, and your PS4 each month, kind of like Xbox games with gold. Now, in the case of the PS3 and the PS Vita, since they're no longer going to have new titles, if you already had backlogged titles that were acquired through that PlayStation Plus service, you will still have access to them as long as you are a PlayStation Plus member. Now, what that means is if you stop being a PlayStation Plus member on your PS4, the PS3 titles and the Vita titles you downloaded through PlayStation Plus, not through purchased means, by mind you, but like through the PlayStation Plus service, will cease to function. So because I don't use it, I can't give you any great examples. I think at one point Transformers Devastation was one of the free PS3 games. So let's just use that as an example, if that is in fact the case. So at one point, let's just say that game was for free through PlayStation Plus on PS3. If you're still paying for PS Plus in 2020, you will still be able to play that game on your PS3. However, if you stop paying for PlayStation Plus, that copy of Transformers Devastation will no longer work, unless presumably you were to resubscribe to it. Which tells me that, I mean, obviously they were always digitally tied. You never really owned those. They were rentals in the purest sense of it. Much like Xbox Games with Gold. The only difference between the two was that Xbox Games with Gold, at least the 360 titles, they were DRM free. You still don't own them because they're digital content, but you at least aren't automatically tied to a subscription service. In the case of these things, you are. So be prepared, because eventually, like I said, servers will shut down. So even if you keep paying for PlayStation Plus, odds are you still wouldn't have access to your backlogged titles. Now, you may not care. That's the whole point with these type of things, is they try to draw them out so long that the vast majority of the user base leaves before it's over. That way there's very few people who give a shit. But long story short, Vita and PS3 titles will eventually, within a year, are no longer going to be part of that package. It'll be frankly, much less financially appealing to be a member. But I see why they're doing this. I mean, they can't support those platforms forever. And I mean, there isn't even really any new content produced for them. So it's kind of like you just have to keep digging through to find new titles. And for what end? I mean, there's not that many people probably who care that much anymore. And so they give it another year. So just be aware that's coming. So there you go. Does that affect you guys? Like, how many of you out there are like, yeah, I was totally into PlayStation Plus, but when they get rid of this, I'm no longer going to support it? How many of you did not know that once your PlayStation Plus membership is terminated, that you will no longer have access to all those titles you downloaded through it? I mean, what do you guys think about it is basically what I'm asking. So there you go. Moving on, we have a round of shout outs here. We're going to try and do this lightning style, because everyone here who I'm about to mention is at the Patreon level in which they get a shout out. I thank you guys for supporting the podcast and everything. It's awesome that you guys are there. But these guys are at the level they specifically get mentioned. So I want to thank the following people: Justin Webb, Jonas Pachonka, Rob Janos, Trey Wagner, and Tim Inman. You guys are all awesome. Thank you very much for supporting me, supporting the channel, supporting the podcast, and just being overall just good people, man. I really appreciate it. All people I've talked to before, and it's always awesome to communicate with you guys and have you be part of this in some way. I appreciate that. So next subject. This one I found kind of funny for a couple of different reasons. There was a story not too long ago where Sega released a demo of Yakuza 6 onto the PlayStation 4 network, and they accidentally released the entire game for free. There was a lot of people who downloaded the demo who found that once they had it, they just could play the entire game. So, like, Sega quality control, hey, not a thing. I mean, don't get me wrong, that game's going to be awesome. But it's been out in Japan for, like, over a year, I think. And it's coming out here widely on, I think, April 17th. So they basically accidentally released the entire game like 2 months early. And at the same time, I know, because I do a lot of stuff, obviously, in the gaming industry through media and influencer stuff, all that shit. They're also giving out a lot of early access codes. Like, we actually already got one over on Game Society for Yakuza 6. We can download it and start playing it right now, even though the game doesn't have another release for another like 5 weeks here. So they're giving out a lot of those codes. I mean, Sega is actually, their approach to Yakuza 6 has been strange. But it seems to be a game they're actually pushing a lot more than they usually do with a lot of their titles, so I give them credit for that. I'm excited about it too, because I never really got too into the Yakuza stuff for the longest time. I mean, a lot of people always try to compare it to Shenmue and say it's like Shenmue with Grand Theft Auto mixed in. It's like, not really. I played a lot of Yakuza 0, and I think that game was awesome as hell, and it's just a funny franchise. Like, we do a ton of videos with that on my other channel, so we're excited to do stuff with Yakuza 6, but at least on Game Society, we decided that with Yakuza 6, we have the early access. We're going to probably do like random videos with it as opposed to any sort of series until maybe, hopefully, eventually we get to do a traditional Yakuza 6 series, because we've been doing it on Yakuza 0. We're not going to jump that far ahead. You know, we'll do Yakuza 0 and then hopefully the Yakuza Kiwami remake, Yakuza 2, Yakuza 3, etc. So we'll see. But that said, as just a gamer, I'm excited about Yakuza 6 in general, just because those Yakuza games, man, like that is the kind of the last throwback of what Sega was, because it's like the only thing they really put into video gaming anymore is that Yakuza franchise, and they put a lot into it. There's a lot of mini games in there, and there's a lot of their own history in it. It's a lot of fan service, and they're a lot of fun. So I highly recommend you get that game, purchase it legally, but at the same time, it's so funny that's the shape Sega's in these days. Like, that's the one game they're probably going to release the entire year, and they accidentally give it away for free for a couple of days. Or maybe it was like for a day. I know that at least if you acquired it that way, they were able to digitally fix that so that it no longer does that. It's no longer the full game. But still, man, that's just weird quality control over there. But anyway, so that's that. Next subject here. Something I actually already talked about in the previous episode of Playload, but I just wanted to talk about it again because it was just such an insane experience. And for those of you who would have missed it and were curious, so Far Cry 5 is going to drop later this month. It's a game I'm very excited about playing the full version of. Now, I've actually played a lot of it already. I got to play it at E3 2017 for the first time. I was actually invited to a Ubisoft event in New York just for the announcement, which was one of the weirdest things I've ever been to. I was told, like, hey, come on out to New York. Here's a plane ticket. We're going to put you up in this hotel, and all we're going to do is tell you about this game. And I was like, what game? They're like, we can't tell you now. That's the whole point. Like, you're going to find out there. So I go to New York. I go to the event, which is literally a 1-hour thing in a hotel room. I walk in, and it's one of the weirdest events I've ever been to, because there's only like 5 other people in there, and they're all in business suits. I'm sitting there wearing my usual like graphic tee and cargo pants that I wear, and they're like real publications, man. They're like New York Times and USA Today and Chicago Tribune, like real news outlets. And then there's me, the fucking YouTuber. And so they sit us all down, and they're just saying, like, we're working on this project. We're very excited about it. And we've chosen all of you because we want you to know about it, and just kind of show you what's up, what we're working on. So we're proud to announce. And then they just showed us this trailer they had made for Far Cry 5. And we were like, oh my God, so Far Cry 5 is coming. They're like, yep, it's coming. So they told us a whole bunch about the game, a lot of which was, of course, NDA. Like, at the time, I couldn't mention that there was going to be a thing. I couldn't mention that, it was going to take place in a fictional place called Hope County, Montana. Like, I couldn't say any of that stuff. There's actually still stuff about it that is NDA that I can't say, and of course I won't. But it was such a weird event. So, like, my experience with that game goes all the way back to, like, March of 2017. And then at E3, I got to play it. I've actually beaten the E3 demo 7 times. I beat it a bunch of times at E3 in the Ubisoft loft, and I got to play it again at like PAX West. Like, I just played a lot, right? So I'm excited about it. Then they had an event for it where I got to play and get like a couple hours worth of footage. And then we just did this other event. This is the one I wanted to talk about. They did this event in San Francisco, like at a ranch. They rented out a ranch, and they decked it out to look like Hope County, Montana. And it was insane. Like, it was just the coolest thing ever. And they had like, it looked like the actual town. They set up like a fake bar that looks like the Spread Eagle bar. They had like all these like American like muscle cars like set up. You just kind of get this sense like, oh, you're really there. And then they brought out some of the actors from the game, including the guy who plays the father. And he took this really cool photo with me of him, like, baptizing me for the purposes of the cult. He came in on a helicopter. It was like so cool, like this open barbecue pit. It was just like the coolest shit ever. Got to play the game for a really long time. Got to do a bunch of videos and stuff over in Game Society. And so I just want to say, like, basically the point of this is, some of those events, man, they can be just the coolest fucking thing ever. And if you ever get the chance to go to something like that, do it. They're so much fun. That one was the best one I've ever been to, hands down. And at the same time, I want to say Far Cry 5, I can't wait to get like the full game of that, because I beat the shit out of 4 and Primal, and this one is different. One thing they told us is that really this game is the true sequel to Far Cry 3. While they liked 4 and Primal, they didn't really feel like they advanced things, but they feel that Far Cry 5 does. And I can't say specifics, but I will say that I agree with that. So I'm excited about checking that out when it's full and final release. And I hope you guys like those games, because to be honest, those are some of my favorite games before I ever got to do any of this type of shit. So I know that it sounds like there's, oh, you got to go to the thing, no wonder you love it. It's like, dude, I loved it, then I got invited to it, so I loved it even more. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it was just awesome to be, picked to do something for something, a game I actually was excited about. Because that's not always the case. Sometimes you get brought to things you really don't care about, and then there's other ones you really care about and you don't get invited. So that was just the happy mix up there where I got to just go to the one that I actually really care about. So I don't know. I hope you guys are interested in Far Cry 5. Are you? Tell me. I'm curious. I'm just genuinely curious, because that's a game that I really enjoy. But I've noticed about myself that I like grinding in games, and that's one thing that Far Cry 5, to a lesser extent, I guess, but the other Far Cry games like 4 and Primal offer you a lot of grinding opportunities to like power up the character, level up the character, and just really make them like OP in that world. And I kind of like doing games that way. It takes an eternity, but that's kind of the way I enjoy doing it when I have time to play a lot of stuff, that is. So yeah, Far Cry 5 I know will offer that possibility, but you also don't have to do it that way. And I gotta say, some of those, like that arcade mode, I think that thing is going to be a blast. It's basically the ability for people to make their own custom worlds in Far Cry 5 and let people play them, kind of like Super Mario Maker, but with Far Cry. That's going to be cool as shit. We got to play that for a while too. That's going to be a lot of fun. And the co-op stuff, that's nothing new, but it'll still be cool. Anyway, I guess we'll move on from that. So next subject is actually one brought to us by Corey Marsh. He is a Patreon backer, and every month, he's been around since the beginning. Every month he gets to pick a subject for the podcast. And this month he specifically asked about SCART cable gouging and why is it happening. Now, SCART cables I've mentioned a million times on this channel. SCART cables are basically like this European video cable format, kind of like the 90s equivalent of HDMI, where it had your sound and had your video all in one cable straight from your device to your TV, and you'd get all of your imagery that way. It had multiple formats inside of it, namely it had a composite pass-through image, it had S-video pass-through, and it had RGB. Now, the problem is in North America, we never had the RGB equivalent. We never had anything that could output RGB, so we didn't really know about it. But now in more modern times, we've all kind of figured out, like, hey, all these old consoles, they have RGB in them, they look really good, but we have no way to get to it in North America except the SCART cable, but we don't have SCART ports on our TVs. So a lot of us over here are using like adapters and boxes and all these type of things. Like personally I use the FrameMeister. There's also alternatives like the OSSC, and then there's like this little junky SCART to HDMI adapter, which at one time I thought was really good until I started using other options and realized it really wasn't. And then there's new ones by like ShinyBow and all this other stuff. But the cables themselves, I never really had a problem getting them because I kind of got out in front of this, because what's been happening is the last couple of years, probably the last like 5 or 6 years, there's been kind of a boom with more people taking advantage of all the SCART cable RGB imagery in their retro consoles. And the result of that is basically supply and demand. There's a lot of people now who want to get the cables, but there weren't enough of those ever made, so now they have to produce them retroactively. I've actually done a video not too long ago on this website in the UK that can actually hook you up with that stuff. I'll actually link the video in the description. But you can get a lot of those things, but he's basically asking, like, isn't it getting a little expensive? It's like, yeah, but supply and demand. The thing is, cables like that really, they're not going to get cheaper. The reason they're not going to get cheaper is because they can only get cheaper when you can produce enough bulk units to sell them to the mass audiences that you can justify that. Now it's more of a made to order type of thing. It's just not popular enough. So it's kind of like vinyl records or like big Blu-ray sets. Like, they're going to be expensive because there's just not enough people who want them. So if you're going to sell only like 5,000 units or whatever, you got to make sure you get your money back out of that. So you got to charge a higher price than if you were to be able to space it out across a ton of units. It's kind of like Sam's Club or Costco logic. And it's kind of how a lot of economics works, unfortunately. But yeah, SCART cables specifically, they really only appeal to a niche market. And I know I'm in it. But yeah, that's unfortunately why it is. So what I would recommend is, first of all, watch other people's videos on which, cables you would want. Meaning, like, take a look at all the consoles you have and see which ones actually there's even a reason to get SCART cables for. Like, for example, they make SCART cables for the original Xbox. You don't need those. Like, the end of the day, you're going to say, okay, component is the way to go, and the component cables are cheaper and easier to get. But it still technically exists. Then there's other consoles where it does make sense, like, the Sega Genesis or the Mega Drive. So just kind of narrow down your options and then figure out among those which ones actually are important to you. And I know a lot of people say, like, oh, I'll use like the Retron 5 or I'll use some other like clone console, which of course is fully within your rights to do. It's just, personally, I'd never do that. I hate clone consoles, but whatever at the end of the day you want. But for purists who really want that experience, just prioritize. But yeah, it's never going to get cheaper. Those things are usually in like the $25 to like $40 range for cables these days, depending on the cable. So like I said, just prioritize which ones are the most important to you, and then just kind of gradually chip away at it. The sad part is, if you really want to get into retro consoles and having them look their best, it is not a cheap hobby. It really is not, especially if you live in North America, because we have to import all our cables from other countries, and we have to buy special converter boxes and all that kind of stuff. Like, none of that stuff exists here natively. So it's, like, if I were to look at it and say, like, I wanted to get, from the get-go, like, let's just say I had nothing and I wanted to play the Sega Genesis on my TV and I wanted to look the best it can. I would have to invest in the cables. I'd have to invest in a FrameMeister. And right there, you're talking maybe like $500 for those two things. It gets expensive, man. So and then of course, if you want more consoles to be connected, you also have to invest in SCART switch boxes, like the one by Bandrich, which can nowadays, because I don't think they make that one anymore, but that's clearly the best one they ever produced. I think that's like $100 switch box now. So it gets up there like pretty fast. So get into it if you're serious. If you're just curious about it, I still say that the cheapo SCART to HDMI box is the one just to kind of like learn on. It's a good learning device to trash. Basically, you can learn how it works, and you'll see that it's definitely better than like composite or S-Video or anything you ever used before. But then after that, it gets a lot better. But it gets a lot more expensive. So I guess that's, to answer Corey's question, that's kind of why I think that is. It's just supply and demand. There's not enough people for enough units. So there you go. Hopefully that answers your question. Thank you very much, Corey. Our next subject is an interesting one that I just found out about. So the ESRB, which is this really only applies to the US and to a lesser extent Canada. The ESRB is basically the American rating system for video games, kind of like movies in the States, for example, have ratings on them. I know in Europe you guys have that PEGE or PEGI system. Germany, I think, has that USK system. You guys know what I'm talking about. Different rating systems. Australia has a different one. Japan has that CERO or CERO one. It's just a rating system to help identify what a game is for what kind of audience. So in the States, M is the highest it goes. M for mature, and then there's like T for teen, E for everyone, and then there's like, EC or something like early childhood, things like that. Movies have that, and it's always a good argument for people who say like, oh, video games cause violence and there's no way for us to know which video games our kids are playing, blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, there's a rating system. Just like movies have rating systems. You're an idiot if you don't know the difference. That's all you have to do, is to explain it to someone. Maybe don't call them an idiot, but they're an idiot. But anyway, so the point is that system exists, and now the ESRB is actually forcing companies to add a label if the game has loot boxes. That surprised me, because loot boxes are actually a hot issue right now, because particularly over what happened with Star Wars Battlefront 2. I think it's Belgium is considering making loot boxes illegal, like completely. Like, you can't do that. I know in Hawaii, there's at least, I think it's a state senator who's pushing to outlaw loot boxes in the U.S., or at least in Hawaii. And like there is a lot of political momentum and social momentum to fix loot boxes because they're perceived as just a gambling thing. So at least the ESRB's contribution to that is going to be to add a label to games if they have loot boxes. Now, personally, I've never got into the whole loot boxes thing. It doesn't, I don't play online, and I don't do any of that play to win crap. So it's never really affected me, but I do think it's an important label for people because a lot of people you have to understand, we're getting to a point now where we have a lot of people who, actually did play video games who are parents. A lot of people who grew up on video games are parents now, but they grew up in a more simple era of that. We're talking like a lot of people my age are parents. A lot of people slightly older than me are parents, and they grew up on like the NES, the Master System, the Genesis, SNES. Their association with video games, even if they're not gamers, it was just kind of like limited. They were the casuals audience. Their association with video games it's a box, you put a game in it, and that's it. You're done after you bought it. They don't know that that's not really true anymore. So you have to, in a sense, educate them that, hey, just because your kid bought the game once doesn't mean it doesn't have these like transactions that your credit card is tied to. Now, that's a good combination of like the parents need to know something, but at the same time, it is good, I guess, to have a warning label on the box that says like, hey, parent, if you buy this, be warned, your kid could potentially rack up a whole bunch of extra charges. But if this is the same parent, you need to educate them on what the fucking ESRB even is. So like, there's only so much you can do to educate people. At some point, they have to take personal responsibility. But I like that the ESRB is doing this just to be more helpful to people in that sense. Especially because I'm not exactly pro loot boxes. I don't know too many people that are. But yeah, I think it's a good step. Will it solve anything? Probably not. But it's a good move. It's a good little chess move. That's about all it is. So there you go. What do you guys think about that? And our last subject here for this particular episode, I just got back from Paris. I'm kind of burned out, and I apologize for that, but I'm doing my best here. But yeah, so I on the plane, because the Oscars had just happened, they had a whole section for award-winning films, which was their way of saying the Oscars without actually using that term, so they don't have to pay any money for that, I guess. But so they had a bunch of them on there, and I watched a few of them, particularly the ones that were all nominated for Best Picture, at least the ones I could find. They had, of those, I think there was like 5 movies nominated, and they had 3 of them. They had Darkest Hour, which was Gary Oldman as Winston Churchill, which Gary Oldman actually won an Oscar for that movie. There was Shape of Water, which actually did win Best Picture, and then 3 Billboards Over Ebbing, Missouri. So I just kind of want to take a minute to kind of talk about each of these movies. We'll start with 3 Billboards Over Ebbing, Missouri, and I apologize because I'm not going to do much on spoilers here. I'm just going to give a kind of a generic review, but if you want to know absolutely nothing about any of these movies, then this is where you tune out, and thank you very much for listening. But 3 Billboards Over Ebbing, Missouri, I had heard a lot of buzz about that. Like, before it came out, people were just kind of perplexed by how long of a title that was and how, like, oddly specific as far as location that is. So that movie won, as far as I know, at least 2 Oscars. Frances McDormand won for Best Actress, and Sam Rockwell actually won for Best Supporting Actor. So I watched that movie, and that was a good movie. It had a lot of it was definitely one of those movies where the tension is very real, and that's always a sign of a good film, is that you're really not sure what's going to happen, and you always kind of feel slightly nervous. That was good in that. But I will say, when I was watching it, I was thinking, like, this is what should have won Best Picture. Like, that's where my mind was. Until the very end. I did not like the ending of that movie at all. That's what I'll say. I found the ending to be incredibly unsatisfactory. But it did make me think a lot, because I was trying to interpret the meaning of the ending. So I guess I'll give it that, because it kept me thinking about it. But that said, I was still unsatisfied. But at the same time, I feel like that might have been the point of the movie, was that you were supposed to be unsatisfied with it, because life isn't a story. Life is life. And I think there's even a line that Frances McDormand's character has in there somewhere about, like, how we're all just, insignificant things on the planet, and this all means nothing, it goes nowhere. And I think that might have been the point they were trying to make. But hey, whatever. That said, from story structure standpoint, yeah, I did not I did not like the ending, but maybe that's why. So I don't know. That said, I still think it was a cool movie, and you should check it out if you get the chance. I don't. In hindsight, though, I would not have picked it for Best Picture. Shape of Water. So I watched that too. I'm just gonna say that movie is. You remember Splash with Tom Hanks from like the mid '80s? I think it was '86. It was basically the serious version of Splash. It was Guillermo del Toro's movie, which meant it was gonna have a fish monster in it with like weird hands and a puppet suit, just like the same. It was basically his. What's the fucking character from Hellboy? I can't remember his name. It was voiced by the dude who played Frasier's brother in Frasier. I'm spacing on his name, but you guys know what I'm talking about. And he swam around in a tank and ate eggs and stuff, which was also a Guillermo del Toro movie. I was like, that character, but unable to speak, is a mermaid type of thing. I don't know, and like a weird Cold War type of movie. And then it turns into like this weird romance film, and I was just kind of like, it had a lot going for it, and I'll give it in the sense that it was a tad unique, but at the same time not really, because it was those other movies just taken from a different perspective. I don't know. I liked it just fine, but I gotta say there's really no reason I would ever watch it again. And to be honest, I'm really surprised that's the one that ended up winning Best Picture. And I think actually Guillermo del Toro won Best Director for that one too. Not like it was bad, and not like he didn't do a good job. I'm not saying any of that shit. I just found it personally to be the least interesting of the three. But that's me. We all have different tastes. But that said, I'd still say check it out, because you should always check out whatever the hell wins Best Picture, just because why not? And then the one that I actually liked the best of those three was Darkest Hour. Now, I will admit a bias up front. I'm very into World War II history. I find it an absolutely fascinating time. And Gary Oldman, obviously, he won an Oscar for that, and about fucking time. So that was like the Oscar to win all Oscars. Like, that was like, it was just a lock Oscar, I think, because it was so overdue for him to win an Oscar. So good on him. And he did a great job as Winston Churchill, obviously. And that's just a cool story, because, people forget, like, what it was like back then. Because World War II, especially in the States, we're always kind of taught, like, yeah, Europe was having its problems and it was going down, and then America came in and, like, kind of solved the problem, which sort of accurate, but it kind of, I think that history does a really great disservice to what the British did in particular in World War II. And the strength it took basically of Winston Churchill and then the king of the time, the king of England of the time, to basically decide to resist fascism when it was so tempting not to. So I that is one of the best things, about the British history, is that they basically fought alone for all of 1940. Like, they have that honor. They single-handedly held fascism at bay for a year, which basically bought them time until we got there to, start that. And the Russians. Let's never underestimate how much work the Russians did in World War II. Like, the real heroes of World War II, as fucked up as it sounds, I'm sure in a post, that's something that they brush aside in history classes, is because right after World War II, the Cold War starts. But really, the Russians took more shit and did a hell of a lot more in Europe than the Americans ever did, and let's not forget that. But yeah, so just credits to the British, and this is what that story was about. It was just about the basically all the effort the British would have to do to kind of hold the line, as it were, against what seemed like an indestructible enemy, and they managed to do it. The only real criticism I had of the movie was that I was so into it and where it was going. I was really sad when it ended, because I was like, no, you keep going. Like, let's do the whole war. Don't just do like this setup to it. So that was my criticism of the movie, is I want to see Darkest Hour 2, the next darkest hour, the darker hour. But anyway, I just think that was a good film, and that would have been my choice. But again, that's where the bias towards World War II stories always fascinating me, especially ones that teach me new things. And that one taught me a lot of new things about the British perspective. Like, I'd known a lot about it on a global sense. Like, I'd known a lot about, as a nation, all the things they did. But like Winston Churchill's personal like, if you want to say, sacrifices and things that he had to do to make that work, I found very fascinating. Now, the film doesn't teach this, but a little history lesson here. Like, the British gave up pretty much everything to win that war. I mean, they traded basically the British Empire to survive that war. So it's intense. But the other film I watched on the plane that I had already seen, that I've already talked about it, I watched Coco again because there was time to, and that was a good movie, and that also won Best Animated Picture, and I might actually argue it's the best of all of those movies. Certainly the one I enjoyed the most. Coco was a good film. If you haven't seen Coco, you should go see Coco, especially without that 20-minute Frozen short in front of it. Much better without that. Anyway, so I think that'll do it for this month. So I want to thank you guys for listening. I want to thank Corey, Tim, Trey, Rob, Jonas, and Justin, all for supporting the Patreon podcast and the Patreon in general. Anybody who's listening who supports me on Patreon, I appreciate it. And anybody who's just listening to the channel in general, just listening to the show, I appreciate that too. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you all later.